Welcome back, social media friends, and strangers and acquaintances. Today I came to read to you again. And today's selection is from The Unabridged, Mark Twain. I bought this book off a sidewalk in New York City a few years ago. And the reason I bought it, it's not because I don't already own everything in this book, because I do. There was a part that I knew I didn't own. And you see that part right there? Opening remarks by Kurt Vonnegut. And I was like, well, guess I need this book now. Because I've read Twain and I've read Vonnegut, and I never knew there was a connection, although it makes sense. You can now knowing, you can see the influence, Twain's influence in Vonnegut's writing. The sarcastic, the deadpan, the kind of the phrasing. But anyway, and I've only read it. I read it once, and I remember it was good. I also remember Vonnegut seemed like he knew he was writing about Twain, right? Obviously, so I think he used some words to show off that I know I'm gonna stumble over, that I know I'm not gonna pronounce right. And I thought about rehearsing. I thought about going and reading this off camera and sorting out those words, and I thought, you know what, that would not be authentic. So here we go. The Unabridged, Mark Twain. Opening remarks. I like how that's how it's not a forward. These are the opening remarks. You know what I mean? The weather, oh my god. Alright, I'm going to read this first. Improv. This is the weather in this book. This is by Twain. No weather will be found in this book. This is an attempt to pull a book through without weather. It being the first attempt of its kind in fictitious literature, it may prove a failure, but it seemed worth the while of some daredevil person to try it, and the author was in just the mood. Many a reader who wanted to read a tale through was not able to do it because of delays on account of the weather. Nothing breaks up an author's progress like having to stop every few pages to fuss up the weather. Thus, it is plain that persistent intrusions of weather are bad for both reader and author. Of course, weather is necessary to a narrative of human experience. This is conceded. But it ought to be put where it will not be in the way, where it will not interrupt the flow of the narrative, and it ought to be the ablest weather that can be had, not ignorant, poor quality, amateur weather. Weather is a literary specialty, and no untrained hand can turn out a good article of it. The present author can do only a few trifling, ordinary kinds of weather, and he cannot do those very good. So it seemed wisest to borrow such weather as it is necessary for the book from qualified and recognized experts, giving credit, of course. This weather will be found over in the back part of the book, out of the way. See appendix. The reader is requested to turn over and help themselves from time to time as they go along, if they desire weather. Mark Twain. See, that style, that almost Weird Al thumb my nose parody to other writing is clearly Vonnegut as well, right? And me. All right. Here we go. Opening remarks by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Mark Twain, 1835 to 1910, was an autodidact. Of course. First sentence. All right, an autodidact for you guys out there, so you don't have to search it, is someone who is self-taught. Autodidact. And I identify with that because as far as literature and writing and reading go, I am mostly self-taught. And which is why every once in a while my friend, I'll be reading and she'll stop me and say, Don, that's not how you say that word. And I'm like, huh? And she's like, yeah. And she's not an English major, right? And she's like, yeah, that's not how you say that word. And I'm like, oh. Because you see, I never studied words or had to look up words, because when you're reading books, if you're paying attention, the context of the story or the writing, usually 99% of the time, will tell you what the word means if you do not know or have never seen it before. If you're paying attention, like I said, 99, let's be conservative, 90%. 90% of the words. The context is going to tell you what it means. So I never studied. Like I said, I just read a bunch of books and that happened and the words get added into your brain. The next thing you know, they're coming out of your mouth. I remember the moment, the first couple moments, it was around 20 something years ago when I started to notice myself using words that I knew no one taught me. Right? And I was like, whoa, it was like magic trick. But anyway, let me keep going. Mark Twain was an autodidact. Of course. His school books were steamboats and mining camps and newspaper offices and so on. His eventual greatness might almost be taken as an insult to formal education in America. It begs this question: what good is school? This is the best reply, I think. School is for people who are not nearly as gifted as was Mark Twain, who need lessons in counterfeiting gifts they do not have. It is an unfair world. Twain was an unfairly endowed with literary talent. wait, let me read that correctly. Twain was as unfairly endowed with literary talent at birth as descendants of John D. Rockefeller, his contemporary, would be endowed with mountains of money a little later on. And I will admit that, yeah, some of it's got to be natural. Like, yeah. My mom was a writer, so, you know. Yes, and Twain was as shrewd and puritanical in managing his literary talent as Rockefeller was in managing money, it seems to me. He squandered almost none of it. His collected works are, among other things, a monument to 19th century ambition, single-mindedness, and efficiency, like Standard Oil. They are a good deal funnier than Standard Oil. I mean, Twain wrote like 8,000 words a day. Like, that is ambition, single-mindedness, you know? Yeah. Rockefeller was a devout Christian, given to supposing out loud that God must have wished him to be as rich as he was. Okay. Talk about manifest destiny. Twain, on the other hand, had almost nothing to say about God and his possible intentions. God does not make an appearance even in the Garden of Eden, in Eve's diary, and not even in paradise itself, in Captain Stormfield's visit to heaven. True. Although he was raised in what has been called the country's Bible Belt, Twain found church services, especially the praying, to be downright comical. Why? Because in an age of steam engines and dynamos and the telegraph and so on, praying seemed so impractical, I think. Twain himself had had tremendously satisfying adventures with the most glamorous conglomerations of machinery imaginable, which were riverboats. So praying, as opposed to inventing and engineering, was bound to seem to him and to many like him as the silliest possible way to get things done. He was what would later be called a technocrat. Yeah, I identify as a Luddite. Ned Ludd. Woo! He wished to sweep away superstitions and romantic illusions with laughter, because they were so useless. Connecticut Yankees should run this world because they kept up with scientific discoveries and they had no illusions. They knew what would really work. They knew what was really going on. Hi-ho! I love Vonnegut. I have heard it said that the ending of A Connecticut Yankee was a prophecy of the world wars Twain did not live to see. Superstitious knights fight technocrats, and both armies become parts of a pestilential mulch of corpses. This seems to me a better description of the war between the Confederacy and the Union than of the World Wars, which pitted technocrats against technocrats and in which no one could have any illusions anymore. It is my belief that Twain was less interested in prophecy than ending his tale some way, almost any which way. So he did what Herman Melville did in Moby Dick. He killed everybody, except for one survivor to tell the tale. It is such a clumsy ending, in my opinion, that it destroys the balance of the author himself. It causes him to suggest some things about himself which he would have preferred not to see the light of day. For instance, Merlin, the personification of contemptible superstitions, is present at the end. That's right, does not die. All through the book, Merlin has been a transparent fraud. But then he casts a spell which is more astonishing than anything the Connecticut Yankee has done. Merlin puts the Yankee to sleep for 13 centuries. He can work miracles after all. Not only that, but Merlin comes on his wicked errand disguised as a woman. Imagine that. Is it possible that Twain, the clear-eyed technocrat, could not help believing in magic after all? I think maybe so. Yeah, he definitely believed in some shit. Like, I won't get into that, but I know for a fact. Is it possible that he suspected that women and their praying, from whom Huck Finn fled in such a frenzy, had mysterious powers superior to those of scientists and engineers? I think maybe so. He was surely devoted to women. No matter how ambivalently he treated them in his writings, he was a player and kind of a jerk, but I won't get into that. Of the 15 volumes of his works issued by Harper and Brothers in 1897, only 3 carry dedications, all of them to females. Okay, yeah. They are as follows. The Innocents Abroad, Volume 1. Quote, "To my most patient reader and most charitable critic, my aged mother, this volume is affectionately inscribed." Tom Sawyer, "To my wife, this book is affectionately dedicated." And The Prince and the Pauper, "To those good-mannered and agreeable children, Susie and Clara Clemens, this book is affectionately inscribed by their father." I do not mean to raise Freudian questions about Twain. You can't, how do you not, though? I am not particularly respectful of the sorts of answers they can bring. Sigmund Freud himself did write about Twain. Incidentally, after Twain was dead, He set a refreshingly un-Freudian example by saying little about Twain's relationships to women or any of that. He did what we should do, too, which was to celebrate how cunningly Twain's best jokes were made. Well said, sir. Ernest Hemingway, another famous autodidact, once said, "All modern American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn." This is at least vaguely true, I suppose. I suppose of many modern books written by American men. I am struck, though, by how little Hemingway's work resembles Twain's. Yeah. Boring! Ha ha ha! He has no ear for dialects. He severely limits his vocabulary. He is enchanted by violence. He can't tell jokes! Perhaps he was inspired by Twain's writings so movingly without taking God into account, and by his demonstration that an American male could be a first-rate artist and a man's man too. I don't know. One thing I do know, a single modern American writer has seemed on occasion like a true son of Twain to me. He is the late Henry Louis Mencken, who, like Twain, grew up in a border state, had a technical background, was not a college graduate, and who was taught to write by newspapermen. All these shared circumstances tended to make both men irreverent about so-called spiritual matters and conventional patriotism, I think. But their most admirable similarity was their genius for perceiving and exploiting the American language's peculiar powers to surprise and amuse. It's true, dude. I never thought about that in that way, but yeah, English is the funniest language. If a writer does not have such genius, and it is rare, then he cannot be a true follower of Mark Twain. Okay. Did not know that. Mencken's masterpiece, incidentally, is a scholarly work entitled simply enough The American Language. Yeah, by the way, some scholarly works can be hilarious, i.e. my papers. You can do it. You can write a profound, intelligent, reference, research, deep, funny paper. It can be done. So many of America's funniest writers have come up through newspapers. Not only Twain and Mencken, but George Ade and Robert Benchley and Don Marquis and Ken Hubbard and Ring Lardner and on, that it may be correct to think of them as editorial writers gone berserk. It is as though they had written solemnly and respectfully about mankind's problems year after year after year, and then one day they couldn't stand it anymore. Nothing would do but that they jeer at their readers for belonging to such a stupid and vain and unlucky and greedy species. Hi-ho! Mencken's reputation does not continue to bloom, as Twain's does. Little about Twain's work seems dated now, save for his pre-Freudian innocence about sexual matters, which only makes him more beguiling. But a lot of Mencken seems narrowly and crankily political now. Yeah. True writing, the best writing is timeless. You can't tell when it's from. And he wrote no fiction. Fiction just might have done for Mencken what it did for Twain, just might have given his often outrageous prejudices the semblance of being universal. Then again, Mencken never wished to be a man of the people. He was squeamish about his relations with the general population, whereas Twain was almost Lincoln-esque and Quixotic, too, in his wish to please crowds without lying to them. This he did, I think, and this he continues to do. Please crowds without lying to them. Twain was so good with crowds that he became, in competition with singers and dancers and actors and acrobats, one of the most popular performers of his time. It is so unusual and so psychologically unlikely for a great writer to be a great performer, too, that I can think of only two similar cases. Homer's, perhaps, and Molière's. And I will guess now that the pessimism and religious skepticism and anti-patriotism of his writings would have been unacceptable to his contemporaries if he had not dared to make public appearances as well. True, within the body of his writings, he softened his harsh opinion of humanity with his adoration of the women in his life, and with his wide-eyed enchantment with the beauty of the planet itself, especially with its waters. Also, as I've already said, he was the most able lover the American language had so far had. But it was the personal appearances, I am sure, that persuaded his fellow citizens that the holder of often monstrous opinions was not a monster, after all. As Twain presented himself in lecture halls, in fact, he was an utterly winsome sort of teddy bear, in need of all the love he could get. If I am right about this, then every present-day comedian who says after mocking something supposedly sacred, "But I'm only kidding, folks," is following in the footsteps of Samuel Clemens, of the uxorious Victorian American gentleman, diligent in business and often depressed, who became a world citizen while necessarily disguised as Mark Twain. Kurt Vonnegut Jr., April 24th, 1976.